That late afternoon, I was driving my old pickup truck along the familiar dirt trail, heading home after an endlessly long day of work. Sweat still soaked my worn-out cotton shirt at the shoulders, and my body felt utterly drained, as if every muscle was screaming for rest. My name is Daniel. My job is a maintenance worker for various sites scattered around the suburbs. Odd jobs like fixing plumbing, checking electrical systems, or patching roofs for small farms. It's nothing glamorous, but it's enough to get me through the days, and I appreciate its simplicity. The sky darkened faster than I expected, with heavy gray clouds rolling in from the horizon, swallowing the faint remaining glow of the sun. The narrow trail was deserted, flanked on both sides by sparse woods interspersed with jagged, rugged rocks. A chilly wind whistled through the cracked window, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, sending an involuntary shiver down my spine. All I wanted was to get home, take a shower, and collapse onto the bed with a cold beer. But then, around a blind curve where the road twisted sharply like a gash in the earth's skin, I spotted a car. It was a luxurious sedan, its shine dulled by road dust, pulled over close to the right shoulder. The left rear tire was completely flat, sagging like a punctured balloon. Beside the car stood an elderly couple, their bewildered expressions clearly visible in the dim glow of their headlights. The old man wore a gray wool jacket, and the old woman had a thin shawl draped around her shoulders. They both looked like city folks completely out of place in this wilderness. They were clearly unfamiliar with the situation. I could tell from the way the man awkwardly glanced around and the woman clung tightly to his arm, her eyes glistening with worry. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't the first time I'd encountered stranded motorists on the road, but today, everything felt heavier. Night was falling fast, and there wasn't a soul around for miles. I hesitated for a few seconds, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. I wasn't the type to meddle in other people's affairs. My life was already exhausting enough with non-stop workdays. And after a long day like this, all I wanted was to get home and forget everything. My eyes flicked to the dashboard clock. It was nearly 6 in the evening, and there was still a long stretch of road ahead. But then memories of my father flooded back, vivid as an old film reel. He had been a soldier with harsh lessons about compassion. "When you see someone in trouble, you don't turn your back, son," he used to say, his voice deep and authoritative yet warm. He told stories of saving comrades on the battlefield, how a small act could change someone's entire life. That memory hit me like a shove in the back. I eased off the gas, gently applied the brakes, and pulled over about 10 meters away from them. My heart pounded, partly from fatigue, partly from an unnamed thrill. Did they need my help? I wondered, but pushed the thought aside. I turned off the engine, stepped out, and my mud-caked boots crunched on the gravel. The wind was biting cold now, whipping at my face like thin blades. As I approached, I quickly noticed the elderly couple was dressed simply, yet elegantly. There was no ostentation, no glittering diamond rings, no expensive watches, just clean, well-tailored clothes that exuded the quiet refinement of people accustomed to a respectable life. I glanced at the completely deflated rear tire, then spoke first. "Are you folks having some trouble? Can I help with anything?" The old man looked up, his snow-white hair fluttering slightly in the cold wind. Deep age lines etched his face, but his eyes remained bright and alert. He let out a short breath and nodded. "Our car has a flat tire. I've been fumbling around for a while, not knowing what to do, and it's getting dark." The old woman stood beside him, clutching the strap of her handbag tightly as if to steady herself. After he spoke, she turned to me with an embarrassed smile. "Thank you for stopping. We really don't know what to do." "Let me take a look," I said, then knelt down to examine the tire. I felt the flat rubber. The tread was heavily worn, with tiny cracks spreading like a spider web. It couldn't be patched temporarily, we'd have to change it with the spare. I walked back to my pickup, opened the truck bed, and pulled out my familiar jack and wrench set, tools I always carried for my daily maintenance work. Returning, I opened their trunk, where the spare tire was neatly stored and still looked fairly new, clearly never used. "You folks stand off to the side for safety," I added, as I positioned the jack correctly. My calloused hands, scarred from years of hard labor, moved with practiced ease, almost instinctively. I'd been doing things like this for ages, from the days as a kid trailing after my father fixing little things around the house to now, living alone in my small suburban cottage. Each turn of the wrench stirred up old memories. My father's low chuckle as he patiently showed me how to hold the tools properly. The familiar smell of grease mingling with the warm family atmosphere I'd left behind long ago. While working, I paid closer attention to our surroundings. This area had virtually no cell signal. I checked my phone and the bars flickered weakly. There were no nearby homes, just sparse woods and rugged terrain where wild animals might prowl at night. Darkness was falling faster than expected, spreading like ink on paper, and the wind began howling through the treetops. I realized that even after changing the tire, continuing the journey at night would be extremely risky for elderly people like them. They could get lost again, or worse, have an accident on the treacherous curves. My heart raced again, a mix of excitement and concern rising. Should I let them go on alone? Or was this the moment to do something more? The elderly couple admitted they had gotten lost after following directions on an old paper map. They didn't know how to use modern GPS, probably because they were accustomed to the old ways. "We came from the city to visit a friend in this area," the old woman explained, her voice trembling slightly. "But the map led us here, and now, this is what happened." They looked utterly confused and anxious. The old man kept glancing at the sky while the woman clutched her shawl tighter. I could sense their fear, being lost in the middle of nowhere, night falling, no one to help. It reminded me of the time my father got lost in the woods while hunting and how he described that fear as a lesson in loneliness. I finished changing the tire, wiped my greasy hands on an old rag from my pocket, stood up and double-checked everything. Their car was drivable again, but I still didn't feel at ease. I looked around the deserted trail as night fell faster than I'd anticipated. Various possibilities ran through my mind. Calling for roadside assistance was nearly impossible with no signal here. Letting them drive on alone in the dark was too dangerous. The road ahead was narrow, full of potholes, and my headlights weren't strong enough to safely guide elderly drivers. One slippery curve could lead to disaster. I stood there for a few seconds, hearing my heart beat clearly in my chest, not from fear, but from a sense of responsibility. Finally, I thought of the simplest option. My home wasn't anything special, just an old wooden cabin with a gas stove and a single bed. But it was dry, sheltered from the wind, and safe. If they agreed, I could invite them to stay the night, then lead them to the main road in the morning where there were service stations and traffic. After a brief pause, I took a deep breath and suggested, "Sir, ma'am, it's getting dark and this road is very dangerous at night. Why don't you come to my place and stay overnight? My house is close by. It's small but clean. Tomorrow morning I'll guide you to the main road. It'll be much safer." The words came out naturally, though inside I was full of hesitation. The elderly couple was surprised by the offer. The old man's eyes widened, and the woman covered her mouth. But they sensed the sincerity in my concern for their safety. It wasn't empty words, but genuine worry. "Are you sure? We don't want to trouble you," the old man asked, his voice filled with gratitude. I nodded and gave a reassuring smile, even though my heart was still racing. We got into our vehicles. I led the way in front with their sedan following behind. Throughout the short drive home, the wind grew colder and darkness closed in tightly on both sides of the path. At that moment, I only thought I was doing what needed to be done, unaware that everything was about to take a different turn. When we arrived home, I opened the door and switched on the familiar yellow light. The warm glow spread out, illuminating my small house. A combined living room and kitchen, a bedroom in the back, and a basic bathroom. Nothing to brag about, but everything was tidy and sufficient, offering a sense of security after a long day. I fetched blankets and pillows to make up the sofa for them, boiled water for hot tea to chase away the lingering chill. To lighten the atmosphere, I shared a few light-hearted stories from work, random anecdotes that didn't go anywhere but were enough to bring smiles. They laughed along, repeatedly thanking me, and the three of us chatted gently about life and the most ordinary things. I didn't expect any grand gratitude, To me, this was simply the right thing to do, just as my father had taught. Don't turn your back on someone in need. But deep inside, I had no idea that the decision to stop on that deserted trail had quietly opened the biggest turning point in my life. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the wind outside the window, my heart was still racing from everything that had happened. What would tomorrow bring? Would they be safe? Or was something unexpected waiting? I drifted into sleep with that sense of anticipation, unaware that this encounter was only the beginning of a dramatic journey. The next morning, I woke up early as had been my habit for many years, while the sun had yet to peek through the sparse treetops. The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 and I sat up immediately, my body still sore from the previous day but my mind unusually alert. The air inside the house was chilly. My breath formed small white clouds in the pitch-black room. I pulled back the curtains and looked outside. Fog shrouded the dirt trail, and the luxurious sedan was still parked quietly in the yard, like an unfamiliar guest in my familiar surroundings. My heart skipped a beat. They were still here, safe through the night. But why did I still feel a vague unease, as if something far greater was lurking in wait? I stepped into the small kitchen, turned on the warm yellow light, and began preparing a simple breakfast. My house bore the marks of a frugal and orderly life, nothing extravagant, just essential items neatly arranged. The old wooden table that my father had built himself, a few worn chairs, and the kitchen shelf with spice jars organized alphabetically. I wasn't a wealthy man, but I always kept everything clean as my father had taught. Orderliness is the foundation of discipline, son. I fried a few eggs, toasted some bread, and brewed black coffee. No sugar, no milk, just the familiar bitter taste that helped me wake up. The aroma of food spread, and I suddenly thought about the elderly couple sleeping on the sofa. Would they be accustomed to such a plain meal? Or did they come from a different world where breakfast meant gourmet dishes? That thought made me pause for a second, my heart beating faster. I knew nothing about them, only that they needed help, and now I was sharing my living space with strangers. As the sun began to rise, the elderly couple woke up, looking much more relaxed after a night's rest. The old man stretched, the old woman smiled at me, and they observed my living space with curious but non-judgmental eyes. "Your home is so cozy," the old woman said softly. They noticed the old but carefully maintained furnishings, the vintage radio on the shelf, the neatly stacked books on repairs, and the spotless floor without a speck of dust. Everything was in order, reflecting a disciplined and responsible person like me. I invited them to the table and we ate breakfast together. The conversation flowed lightly. They asked about my work and I told them about my days maintaining sites, about how I liked the simplicity, but inside I sensed the difference. They spoke with an elegant tone, like people who had experienced a refined life. My heart pounded as I thought they might be judging me, or worse, pitying me. "Do you live here alone?" the old man asked, and I nodded, briefly mentioning my parents a few hours' drive away. The atmosphere was warm, but I couldn't shake the nervousness. Was this the end or just the beginning of something? After breakfast, I gave their car one final check to ensure it was safe to drive. I didn't want to leave any risks, especially since they had a long journey ahead. I knelt down, checked the tire pressure, tightened the lug nuts, and even inspected the fuel level. "I just want to double check for peace of mind. Safety first," I muttered, my hands trembling slightly with worry. They stood watching, smiling gratefully. "You're so thorough, thank you for helping us," the old woman said. I nodded, but in my mind, images of the dark, dangerous trail from the night before flooded back. What would have happened to them if I hadn't stopped? That thought made my heart race, a dramatic feeling surging as if life was testing me. We got into our vehicles and I drove ahead to lead the elderly couple out of the dirt trail. The narrow, winding road was full of potholes and jagged rocks, making my truck jolt constantly. I glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing the sedan following, and my heart pounded every time we navigated a treacherous curve. The wind blew fiercely, leaves scattering wildly, and I prayed nothing unexpected would happen. Finally, after nearly an hour, we merged onto the main road, where signs were clear, gas stations gleamed under the morning sun, and cell signal returned reliably. I pulled over to the shoulder, breathing a sigh of relief, but the anticipation lingered. Before parting, the elderly couple expressed their sincere gratitude. They didn't just thank me for fixing the car, but for not abandoning them in the wilderness and for opening my home to strangers. "You saved us, not just the car," the old man said, his voice trembling as he gripped my hand tightly. The old woman hugged me gently, her eyes glistening with tears. My heart raced, emotions overwhelming me. I had never received such heartfelt thanks. They handed me a business card and their home address, inviting me to visit any time. "Please come see us, Daniel. We want to host you properly as a way to repay your kindness," the old woman said warmly. I accepted the card, a thick, elegant paper with refined gold lettering, politely but without much thought. To me, this was just a chance encounter, not a relationship to cultivate long-term. I said goodbye, watched the sedan speed off on the main road, and returned to my daily routine. But inside, a strange feeling crept in, as if some door had just cracked open. Throughout the day, I was busy with work, repairing a leaky roof, checking electrical systems for a small farm. Sweat poured down, my limbs ached, but my mind kept wandering to the elderly couple. Had they arrived home safely? The business card sat heavy in my wallet like a secret. That evening when I got home, I sat on the old sofa, turned on the table lamp, and absent-mindedly picked up the card. The address was clearly printed, an unfamiliar street in the big city. Curious, I entered it into Google Maps on my old phone. The result left me stunned. A gated community with strict security reserved only for the ultra-wealthy and elite. Satellite images showed enormous villas, swimming pools, lush gardens, and high fences with cameras everywhere. My heart pounded like a drum, blood rushing to my face. Who were they? How could they have seemed so unassuming the night before? The image of the elderly couple standing bewildered beside the trail with a flat tire didn't match at all with what I saw on the screen. I sat in silence for a while, my hands shaking as I held the phone. The gap between our worlds suddenly became stark. I, an ordinary maintenance worker with a simple life, and they, people from the upper echelons. Was their invitation genuine, or just politeness? The excitement surged as if I had just touched a great secret. That evening, I drove to my parents' house for Christmas. The familiar road, sparse streetlights, and cold wind whistling through the cracked window. My parents' home was in a small town, a few hours' drive from the suburbs, a cozy wooden house with a sparkling Christmas tree in the yard. As I stepped inside, the smell of baked goods and roasted meat filled the air, and my parents hugged me tightly. My father, Gail Miller, a former soldier with a sturdy build despite his age, patted my shoulder. "You're here just in time, we've just set the table." My mother, Genesis, with her gentle smile, pulled me to the dining table. The family meal was warm, with turkey, mashed potatoes, and cheap wine. During dinner, I recounted the story of meeting the elderly couple with the flat tire and their invitation to visit. I told it in detail, the dark trail, the decision to stop, the night at my house, and the business card. My heart raced as I spoke, as if reliving the moments. My parents listened with curiosity mixed with hope. My father raised an eyebrow. My mother's eyes lit up. "You should go visit them, Daniel," my mother said, her voice full of hope. "Not for money, but because this could be a rare opportunity in life that not everyone gets." My father nodded, adding, "Life sometimes has surprises, son. But stay grounded. Don't get swept away." They advised me that way. Not pushing, just words from experience. I smiled at their advice and nodded politely. I didn't argue, but inside I didn't place much expectation on it. For me, a stable life, with enough to eat, enough to live, and family peace was more important than any glamorous promises. I was used to the quiet, waking early, working hard, coming home alone. Their invitation might just be a passing breeze. Christmas night ended peacefully. We exchanged gifts, A new jacket from my parents, and I gave them a book on military history that my father liked. Laughter echoed, but inside me the vague feeling of a slightly open door still lingered. As I drove home, the road pitch black, headlights illuminating swaying trees, I couldn't help pondering. Should I visit, or let it all fade away? My heart beat fast with that anticipation, and I knew that, even if I believed life would continue quietly deep down, a storm was brewing. Time passed quickly, and the encounter with the elderly couple gradually faded into the background of my memories, like a story hastily told over Christmas dinner. In the days that followed, I returned to my familiar routine. Waking at dawn, driving my old pickup truck to scattered small maintenance jobs in the suburbs. The work remained the same, fixing leaky pipes, inspecting aging wiring, patching roofs for isolated farms. Sweat poured under the scorching sun or drizzling rain, my hands and feet growing more calloused each day, but I appreciated that simplicity. Quiet evenings in my modest home, sitting on the old sofa eating dinner alone with a sandwich or instant noodles, then reading a book or watching TV late into the night. The business card lay forgotten in my wallet, buried among a jumble of cluttered papers. I no longer thought much about it. My life stayed the same, peaceful, with enough to eat and live on, no grand ambitions. But sometimes in the dead of night, the image of the dark dirt trail and their grateful smiles would flash by, making my heart skip a beat. Was something waiting? Or was it just an illusion? Then one morning, everything changed abruptly. I was kneeling under an old tractor at a remote farm, wrench in hand tightening bolts, when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I wiped my hands on a dirty rag and looked at the screen. A call from my mother. Her voice was panicked from the very first second. "Daniel, my son, your father collapsed. The doctors are taking him to the hospital. It's critical." My heart seemed to stop. Blood rushed to my head, making my ears ring. I staggered to my feet, my voice trembling. "Mom, calm down. I'll be there right away." Without time to explain to the farm owner, I tossed my tools into the truck bed, jumped into the cabin, and floored the accelerator. The road back to town was long and winding, but today it felt endless. Wind howled through the cracked window, and I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My father, the strong man who had once been a soldier, the one who taught me everything about discipline and self-respect, was now lying there, in critical condition. Images of him laughing heartily at our recent Christmas dinner flooded back, making my eyes sting with tears. Would he pull through? Or was this the storm I had sensed coming? I abandoned my work and drove straight to the hospital, my heart burning with anxiety. The highway blurred in my vision, horns blared as I ran red lights at intersections. When I arrived, the sterile white corridors and familiar antiseptic smell hit me, twisting my stomach. My mother was sitting in the waiting area, her face pale, eyes red from crying. She threw her arms around me. My son. He suddenly had chest pain and collapsed in the kitchen. I held her shoulders tightly, trying to stay calm, but my heart pounded like a war drum. We waited outside the emergency room, each second dragging like an hour. Finally, the doctor emerged, his face grave. "Mr. Miller has suffered a severe heart attack. We've stabilized him temporarily, but he needs emergency surgery to place a stent." I nodded, but his next words hit like a punch. "There is health insurance, but the remaining costs are around $50,000. The family needs to prepare." That figure echoed in my mind, cold and merciless. I silently reviewed the cost breakdown the doctor handed me. The black and white numbers on the paper left me reeling. $50,000. A colossal sum for our family. I sat alone in a corner of the corridor, calculating every possibility. My savings amounted to just $10,000. Bank loans involved cumbersome procedures requiring at least 2 weeks. Time my father didn't have. What could I do to come up with the money? My friends were just ordinary craftsmen like me. No one had that kind of cash. I called several medical aid organizations, my voice pleading, "Hello, my family needs urgent help." But the response was always, "We'll review it, but we need complete documentation." Time, something my father couldn't afford to wait for. My heart raced, cold sweat breaking out despite the cool corridor. Was there any way? Or would I have to watch my father slip away because of money? The following days passed in tension and exhaustion. I practically lived at the hospital, dozing fitfully on waiting room chairs, interspersed with futile calls to banks and charities. My mother cried more, and I had to be strong to comfort her. "I'll figure out how to cover the hospital bills, Mom, don't worry." But late at night, when the hospital was silent except for the beeping machines from my father's room, I sat alone in the waiting area, my heart heavy. My hand absent-mindedly reached for the business card tucked away in my wallet, the thick, elegant paper with the upscale address. The image of the elderly couple appeared vividly, their grateful smiles, their sincere invitation. Would they help? Or was this just wishful thinking? My heart pounded, a surge of excitement mixed with desperation rising. I wrestled intensely with myself. Part of me saw reaching out to them as exploiting kindness. I had helped them out of duty, not expectation of reward. Another part knew this might be the only chance to save my father. Every second of hesitation brought him closer to death. I remembered the values my father had instilled in me. Live with dignity, never bow for money. He used to tell stories from his military days, refusing bribes to preserve his honor. "Remember my words, son. Money comes and goes, but once you lose your self-respect, it's gone forever." That very memory made me hesitate, even feel ashamed at the thought of knocking on the door of the wealthy. I stood up, pacing the dim corridor, crumpling the card in my clenched fist. Would my father forgive me if I did this? Or would he be disappointed? But each time I saw him lying there, growing frailer by the day, pale skin, weak breaths through the oxygen tube, all my rigid moral boundaries began to waver. He was no longer the strong man, he was just a frail old man who needed his son to save him. I sat by his bedside, holding his hand. "Dad, I'll do whatever it takes to save you." Tears rolled down my cheeks for the first time in years. I realized that this time I wasn't reaching out to them out of ambition, but because there was no other choice. The inner storm raged, my heart pounding as if it might burst. I had to choose, self-respect or my father's life. After many sleepless nights lying awake on the hospital bench, listening to rain pattering on the window, I made the hardest decision of my life. That morning, the sky was overcast like my mood. I gathered the papers, the hospital bill, my father's medical records, and jotted down what I needed to say on a crumpled sheet. "Hello, I'm Daniel, the one who helped you on the trail. My father is critically ill and I need help." The words were simple, but each one cut like a knife. I prepared myself for possible rejection, pitying looks, polite refusals. My heart raced, sweat beading despite the cold. That morning, I left the hospital and drove toward the upscale neighborhood address I had looked up earlier. The highway stretched ahead, cars speeding past on both sides, but my mind was completely elsewhere. In my head, only one image repeated, my father lying motionless in the hospital bed, his pale face under the harsh white lights. Throughout the entire drive, I felt no hope, only the heavy burden of someone forced to gamble his dignity to preserve his father's life. Wind howled through the window crack, and I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Would they even remember me? Or would that door slam shut in my face? The anticipation built, as if I were hurtling into a bottomless abyss. But I couldn't turn back. My father was waiting for me. The highway leading to the exclusive enclave for the ultra-wealthy seemed to stretch endlessly, each kilometer passing with the heavy burden of anxiety. My old pickup truck rattled slightly over every pothole, and the engine growled like the turmoil in my heart. I glanced at the crumpled sheet of paper on the passenger seat, where I had hastily jotted down what I needed to say. A plea that wasn't begging, just a presentation of the truth. But why did it still make me feel ashamed? My father had taught me to stand on my own 2 feet, never to bow before anyone. Now here I was, driving to the home of strangers, hoping they would throw me a lifeline. My heart pounded, cold sweat trickling down my spine despite the weak air conditioning struggling to blow cool air. Was this a mistake? Or the last chance? I pressed the accelerator harder, trying to dispel those thoughts, but they clung to me like the shadows outside the window. As I turned onto the road leading to the gated community, everything changed abruptly. Towering fences made of glossy black steel rose like a wall separating two worlds. The massive iron gate featured intricate carved patterns, and security was stringent. Cameras sweeping every angle, uniformed guards standing watch with wireless earpieces. I stopped at the control booth, my heart racing so fast I could hear the thumping in my ears. A guard approached, his face stern beneath the brim of his cap. "May I have your name and the reason for your visit?" he asked, his voice even but cold. I handed over the business card, trying to stay calm even though my voice trembled slightly. "I'm Daniel Miller. I'm here to see Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery. I once helped them when they had a flat tire. Just tell them that, and they'll know who I am." The guard took the card and checked the information on his tablet. He paused for a few seconds, then nodded slightly, though his eyes still held a trace of wariness. The massive gate slowly swung open, emitting a heavy metallic groan that echoed in the quiet space. I drove inside, my heart beating slowly but heavily, feeling as though I had just crossed an invisible boundary, into a foreign world where people like me didn't belong. The vast grounds unfolded before me, everything maintained with meticulous perfection. The lawn was trimmed as neatly as a carpet, the pathways spotless without a speck of dust, and flower bushes blooming vibrantly under the morning sun. The villa appeared magnificent yet understated, a two-story house with classical architecture, large glass windows reflecting the light, and a fresh red-tiled roof. I parked in front of the mansion gate and instinctively glanced at myself in the rearview mirror. My old jacket worn at the shoulders, boots with heels ground down and caked in mud from job sites. The appearance of an ordinary laborer, completely out of place in this luxurious setting. My heart beat faster, a wave of inferiority surging. I looked like an outsider, and that thought made my hands tremble as I turned off the engine. Would they mock me, or simply send me away politely? I took a deep breath, stepped out of the truck, and pressed the intercom button with stiff fingers. The smaller gate opened, and the elderly couple emerged to greet me with genuine warmth and familiarity. Mr. Charles, with his snow-white hair and warm smile, shook my hand firmly. "Daniel, you came. We've missed you." Mrs. Helen hugged me gently, her voice soft. "Come inside, dear. Don't stand out here." There was no class divide between rich and poor, no condescending gaze, just a sincere welcome that eased my tension, though the wariness remained. My heart was still racing, but now from surprise. They really remembered me? We stepped inside, and the elegant yet cozy interior enveloped me. Polished wooden floors, soft leather sofas, and a fireplace crackling gently even though the weather wasn't particularly cold. Mrs. Helen prepared tea, Mr. Charles invited me to sit, and we chatted lightly about the weather, as if I were an old friend dropping by. But then I had to reveal the real reason. In that setting, I recounted my father's situation. The sudden illness, a severe heart attack, the emergency surgery needed for a stent, and the costs far beyond our family's means. My voice stayed calm, but my hands gripped the teacup so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My father is a veteran. He's always been strong, but now, we can't manage it. I didn't come here to beg. I just hoped you might be able to help. I didn't plead or shed tears. I stated it straightforwardly, ready to accept refusal. For me, coming here had already been the hardest part, as if I were stripping away my last layer of dignity. My heart pounded as I waited, for rejection, for heavy silence. The elderly couple listened attentively, their expressions unchanged, no doubt, no disdain. They showed concern for every detail, especially how I placed honor and family above myself. Mr. Charles asked about my father's condition, and Mrs. Helen held my hand in comfort. "You did the right thing coming here, Daniel. We understand. After grasping the full situation, they immediately offered to cover the entire cost of my father's surgery, with no conditions, no expectation of repayment. We'll take care of all the hospital expenses for your father, don't worry, Mr. Charles said decisively, his voice firm. That swiftness left me stunned, my mouth agape but unable to speak. My heart seemed to stop for a second, then raced wildly in disbelief. They were really helping? Not out of pity, but genuine kindness? I stammered my thanks, but they waved it off. You saved us on that trail, now it's our turn. It didn't stop there. Charles and Helen also took the initiative to say they wanted to visit my father at the hospital that very day. Mrs. Helen said calmly but firmly that helping wasn't just about money, but about being there when someone needed it most. I nodded, returned to my old pickup, and started the engine first. Their limousine followed quietly behind, maintaining a respectful distance. I led the way, familiar with every turn and stretch of road to the hospital that I had traveled countless times in recent days. On the drive, my hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. In my mind, the image of my father lying motionless in the hospital bed kept replaying, his pale face under the cold white lights. I wondered what he would think if he woke up and learned I had sought their help. Would he be proud that I hadn't turned away when backed into a corner? Or disappointed that I had to lower my head and ask others for aid? At the hospital, the elderly couple's presence created an entirely different atmosphere. They spoke with the doctors, inquired about his condition in detail, and showed deep respect for the man who had once served as a soldier. My father, though weak, opened his eyes to look at them, and the faint smile on his lips moved me deeply. My mother hugged Mrs. Helen, tears streaming down her face in gratitude. I observed it all with mixed emotions, profound gratitude, astonishment at their generosity, and confusion upon realizing that the kindness I had once given was now returning in the most unexpected way. Like a perfect circle, yet full of drama, from the deserted trail to the sterile hospital room. My heart raced, a warm feeling creeping in amid the worry. Was this a dream? Or was reality changing too quickly? Before leaving the hospital, the elderly couple mentioned another possibility. They expressed their desire for me to consider working for their family company. "We're not doing this as a favor, Daniel," Mr. Charles said seriously. "We see ability and discipline in you. This is an opportunity for you to grow." That offer opened an entirely new path, from an ordinary maintenance worker to an employee in their empire. But it also meant stepping deeper into a world I had never belonged to. Towering office buildings, high-pressure meetings, and the demands of the elite. I didn't respond immediately, only nodding politely. "I'll need some time to think about it, sir." My heart raced with anticipation. Was this an opportunity or a trap? I didn't know, but the feeling made everything more dramatic. As I left the hospital and drove home alone, I clearly felt that from this moment on, my life had taken a different turn. No longer just a bystander who happened to help, I was standing at the threshold of a journey full of challenges and upheaval. The wind still howled outside the window, but now it carried hope mixed with anxiety. My father had been saved, but what about me? Was I ready to step through that door? The excitement surged, and I knew that the real storm was only just beginning. After my father's surgery stabilized, I returned to my familiar routine. Days spent driving my old pickup truck to scattered small maintenance jobs, fixing rusty pipes or inspecting electrical systems in isolated rural homes. Sweat still poured under the blazing sun. My hands and feet grew more calloused with fresh scratches, and evenings remained quiet in my modest house with quick meals and fitful sleep. But my mind was no longer at peace as before. The job offer from Mr. and Mrs. Charles and Helen Montgomery kept resurfacing in my thoughts, like a persistent ghost. Every time I gripped a wrench to tighten bolts, I would see images of their luxurious villa and hear Mr. Charles's voice. "This is an opportunity for you to grow." My heart would race each time, a mix of excitement and fear surging through me. Did I belong in that world? Or was I just an outsider who would sooner or later be pushed away? I tried to shake it off by focusing on work, but at night, lying in bed listening to the howling wind, those thoughts flooded back, making sleep harder than ever. I decided to talk it over frankly with my parents. One evening I drove to their house. The familiar road now carried the weight of impending choices. The home was still cozy, with the smell of baked goods from the kitchen and the dim yellow table lamp. My father, Gale, though still weak after surgery, sat firmly in his armchair, his eyes sharp as in his military days. My mother, Genesis, busied herself making tea, but her gaze was full of concern. We sat around the dining table and I told them everything. The offer from the Montgomerys, the position in their large company, and my hesitation. "I don't know if I'm suited for it," I said, my voice slightly trembling. "It's a completely different world from mine." My father listened without interrupting, then spoke in his deep, warm, yet stern voice. "Son, I won't push you. But remember, any choice requires discipline and responsibility. You have to bear the consequences, good or bad." He emphasized each word like teaching an old military lesson. "Don't go for the money. Go because you want to challenge yourself." My mother held my hand, her voice gentle. "I'm worried for you, Daniel. That world is complicated, but I believe you're mature enough to decide for yourself. Just remember, you can come home anytime." That conversation made my heart race. Their support wasn't easy advice, but a challenge. Was I strong enough? Or would I fail miserably? I hugged them goodbye and drove home in the dark, the cold wind whistling through the cracked window, carrying growing anticipation. After many days of deliberation, sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, weighing risks and benefits, I decided to give it a try. Not for a glamorous, life-changing dream, but as a test. If it didn't suit me, I was ready to leave without resentment and return to my simple maintenance life. My heart pounded as I called Mr. Charles. "Sir, I accept the job at your company." His voice was joyful over the phone. "Excellent, Daniel. We'll start on Monday." I packed my bags, a few clean sets of clothes, personal tools, and drove to the city filled with anxiety. The highway blurred in my vision. Each road sign seemed to remind me this was a turning point. Would I regret it? Or was this a real opportunity? That anticipation made my hands grip the steering wheel tightly, cold sweat breaking out despite the cool weather. My first day stepping into the Montgomery family company, Montgomery Enterprises, a massive conglomerate in technology and real estate, left me overwhelmed by the scale and professionalism. The modern headquarters featured towering glass buildings, high-speed elevators, and vast, brightly lit hallways under LED lights. The operations were complex, servers humming in data rooms, large screens displaying real-time data, and employees moving quickly with laptops in hand. Strict discipline, precise schedules, clear procedures, and the intense work pace made me feel like I'd entered another world. My heart raced as I swiped my access card. The security guard nodded politely but with curious eyes. Mr. Charles greeted me in the lobby, shaking my hand firmly. "Welcome to my company." Mrs. Helen smiled from afar, but I couldn't shake the worry. Was I able to keep up? Or would I be swept away on day one? I was placed in an entry-level position involving operations and maintenance of internal systems, aligned with my repair expertise, but in an entirely different environment from what I'd known. No longer isolated suburban sites. Now it was a complex network with cloud servers, automation software, and high-end equipment. The department manager, a middle-aged man named Mr. Harlan, assigned my first task, inspecting and maintaining the data backup system. "Don't let me down, Miller," he said in a neutral but expectant tone. The initial days were incredibly tough. I had to learn procedures from scratch, reading thick manuals, familiarizing myself with new technologies like network monitoring software and IoT devices. Time pressure weighed heavily, tight deadlines and strict oversight from cameras. I realized that here, even the smallest mistake could have major consequences. A maintenance error could disrupt the entire system, affecting hundreds of employees. My heart pounded every time I hit the run button, cold sweat breaking out as I waited for results. Would I mess up or get fired in the first week? Some colleagues were skeptical of me from the start. Rumors spread like wildfire in break room conversations. That new guy is a connection of the owners getting special treatment. I overheard it while getting coffee. My heart raced with anger, but I held it in. They looked at me with scrutinizing eyes, a manual laborer among sharply dressed people carrying iPads. I didn't argue. I chose silence and focused on work. Every morning I arrived earlier than required, checking systems before others came, and stayed late to learn more. But the anticipation remained. Would the rumors isolate me? Or did I need to prove myself through actions? Meanwhile, Landon Montgomery emerged as a complete opposite shadow. He was the Montgomery's son, holding a high title, vice president of operations, but rarely showed up on time. I first met him in the hallway, tall and slim, hair slicked back with gel, wearing expensive suits but with a crooked tie. Landon often neglected work, skipping important meetings for golf or friends, disregarding safety protocols and not hiding his contempt for me. "You're the new guy? Hope you're better at fixing systems than fixing tires," he said sarcastically in our first encounter, his voice dripping with mockery. My heart raced with anger, but I only nodded politely. "I'll do my best, sir." Landon quickly realized my presence wasn't just that of a regular new hire. He saw me as a potential threat, even though I had no intention of competing. Perhaps because Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery occasionally mentioned me with mild praise, or because he sensed the difference. I worked hard, while he was lazy. Small clashes began to appear, making the atmosphere increasingly tense. Landon deliberately made things difficult, assigning vague tasks like check the system, make it stable without specifics, then downplaying my efforts in front of others during meetings. "What's taking Miller so long?" he'd say outright, even though I'd finished early. My heart pounded each time, blood rushing to my face from frustration. Was he trying to push me out? Or was this just the first challenge? I recognized it, but didn't confront him directly. That wasn't my style. Instead, I chose to work harder, learn faster, and fix oversights others missed. I quietly resolved lingering operational issues, a minor security vulnerability, a loose cable that could cause a fire, or optimizing software for energy savings. No need for credit. I did it out of responsibility, as my father taught. Charles and Helen observed everything from behind, through reports and cameras. They didn't intervene or defend me publicly, just quietly assessing how I handled pressure and unfairness. I sensed it, the look in Mr. Charles' eyes when we passed in the lobby, the encouraging smile from Mrs. Helen. But their silence made me more anxious. Did they see me as good enough? Or would they be disappointed? Gradually, my work results began to speak for themselves. Glitches decreased noticeably, systems ran smoother, progress stabilized, and other departments started acknowledging my contributions. "Miller fixed that really well," a colleague whispered in the break room. My heart raced with pride, but I remained humble. At the end of the initial probation period, I still felt out of place in this unfamiliar world. Lonely lunches, superficial conversations, and relentless pressure. But I had proven one thing. I wasn't standing here because of kindness or pity, but because of my own ability and discipline. Mr. Charles called me into his office and patted my shoulder. "You're doing very well, Daniel. Keep it up." Those words made my heart race with anticipation. A new chapter was opening, but Landon remained a lurking shadow. Would the clashes grow bigger? Or would I get pulled into the whirlwind? That dramatic feeling made everything tense, like a ticking time bomb. Landon, he increasingly looked at me with hostile eyes, and I knew the real conflict was only just beginning. Every morning arriving at the company, my heart raced again, waiting for the unexpected. Would I hold firm or get knocked down? This journey was full of challenges, and I was right in the eye of the storm. Time passed quickly in the harsh world of Montgomery Enterprises, and I gradually grew accustomed to its frantic pace. No longer the bewildered newcomer wandering the hallways with curious and anxious eyes, I had become a reliable link in the operations department. Every morning I swiped my card early, sat in front of large screens with data streaming endlessly, and checked the systems before others arrived. The work was no longer unfamiliar. I knew how to handle sudden network errors, optimize servers to prevent overloads, and coordinate with other departments without needing guidance. But that familiarity didn't reduce the sense of anticipation. On the contrary, it made me more vigilant. My heart raced every time the elevator doors opened, wondering what surprise today might bring. An urgent email? Or an impromptu meeting where all eyes turned to me? I had learned that here peace was just an illusion. The storm could strike at any moment. Gradually, I began to be assigned more complex issues, the kind others avoided like the plague. Overlapping maintenance systems where outdated processes caused sluggish performance. Long-standing errors like obsolete cables at risk of causing fires or faulty software leading to incomplete data backups. Manager Harlan called me into his office, his tone serious. "Daniel, you handle this. No one wants to touch it because they're afraid of the responsibility, but I believe you can take it on." My heart pounded with the pressure. This wasn't minor repairs in the suburbs. These were problems that could affect the entire company, potentially costing millions if something went wrong. I spent hours in front of the computer, analyzing data, testing solutions, my hands trembling slightly as I ran diagnostic programs. Drawing on my practical experience from years as a maintenance worker and the disciplined mindset forged by my family, my father taught me to always double-check before calling something done. I steadily improved performance. I didn't propose flashy ideas like suggesting expensive new equipment. Instead, I focused on sustainable and safe solutions, such as restructuring processes to reduce recurring errors or replacing old components by optimizing what we already had. The results gradually emerged. Systems ran smoother, downtime decreased significantly. But each time I finished, my heart still raced. Had I missed something? Or would someone downplay my efforts? Some mid-level managers began to take notice of me, no longer with the skeptical looks of the early days, but with genuine recognition. They saw that I was someone who got things done, without complaining about overtime, without seeking credit or speaking up in meetings. I simply quietly completed my tasks, just as my father had taught. Do good work, and it will speak for itself. After one smoothly concluded operations project, Mr. Harlan approached and lightly patted my shoulder. "You're changing this department, Daniel." Those words warmed my chest for a moment, but they were quickly followed by the familiar anticipation. I understood that being noticed also meant shouldering more responsibility, and sometimes attracting less than friendly glances. Gradually, colleagues started coming to me whenever they encountered issues rather than avoiding them as before. "Daniel, can you take a look at this error? The system seems to be acting up again." I helped them without hesitation because to me it was just work that needed doing. But deep down I clearly sensed the atmosphere around me shifting. It was no longer mere recognition. It felt like a cold breeze had just passed, a sign that the storm was no longer far off. Meanwhile, Landon grew increasingly irritated by my presence. He felt his position was threatened, even though I had never shown any competitive ambition or desire for power. For me, the job was simply about doing the best I could, not climbing the ladder or seizing someone's seat. But for Landon, it was entirely different. I could see it clearly in our hallway encounters. His eyes sharper, his fake smile masking jealousy. My heart raced every time he entered the meeting room, wondering what he would do today. Landon began acting more impulsively at work, ignoring safety protocols, approving things without proper checks, like green-lighting a software update without testing or making emotional interventions in operational decisions without understanding the consequences. "Speed it up, don't drag it out," he snapped in one meeting, his voice full of recklessness. Colleagues whispered behind his back, "He's digging his own grave." But I stayed silent, focusing on my own tasks even as the anticipation grew. Would his behavior drag me into trouble? Then an internal incident occurred, sudden and serious, caused by Landon's hasty decision. He approved a system change without thorough testing, leading to operational disruption. Servers overloaded, data delayed, and other departments complaining loudly. Phones rang nonstop, urgent emails flooded in, and the office atmosphere was tense as a drawn bowstring. My heart pounded when Manager Harlan called. "Daniel, come handle this crisis. We have 2 hours to fix it before we lose a major client." I rushed into the server room, sweat pouring down. My father's image appeared. "Stay calm, son. Focus on the problem." I concentrated on resolving it, coordinating with related departments, calling technicians, analyzing error logs, and applying emergency solutions to reroute data. Everything was chaotic, screens flashing, colleagues rushing back and forth, time slipping away like sand. I fixed the errors step by step, minimizing damage, recovering 80% of the hanging data, and quickly restored the system to stability. When the final screen turned green again, everyone breathed a sigh of relief, but I didn't point fingers or expose Landon's mistake, even though I knew the cause. I simply reported that it was resolved, my hands still trembling from adrenaline. After that incident, my reputation rose noticeably. Colleagues began to trust me and proactively sought my help when facing difficulties, rather than shirking responsibility as before. Manager Harlan sent a department-wide email praising the effort, and Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery surely knew. My heart raced with pride, but also with worry. This attention might make Landon even angrier. Charles and Helen recognized my growth through each stage. They valued not only my skills, but also how I stayed calm and put the collective good above personal ego. Mr. Charles called me into his private office. "You did very well, Daniel. I can clearly see the difference in how you handle things." Those words warmed my heart, but I couldn't help feeling anticipation. Did they also see the underlying conflicts? They said nothing about Landon, only quietly observing as if testing both of us. In contrast, Landon grew increasingly isolated in his own family's company. Reminders from his parents, private meetings he complained about to a few close colleagues, no longer landed as guidance but fueled feelings of being controlled and undervalued. I overheard him talking to a colleague in my department. "They like that new kid more than me now." Landon began nurturing resentment, quietly but palpably. In his eyes, I was no longer just an employee but an outsider, gradually taking the trust and position that rightfully belonged to him. He avoided me more, but when we crossed paths, his gaze was full of hatred, like a cornered animal. My heart raced each time, a chill running down my spine. What would he do? Spread bad words? Or something worse? I sensed the change in Landon's eyes and demeanor. I became more cautious, keeping my distance, documenting every email and meeting for self-protection. But I never imagined that those negative emotions were quietly building, like a time bomb waiting to detonate. Time continued to pass in the relentless rhythm of the company, and after my clear contributions to operations and crisis management, I was officially recognized by the leadership. It wasn't a grand ceremony or a widely publicized announcement, but a brief meeting in Mr. Charles's office. He sat behind his large wooden desk, Mrs. Helen standing beside him with a warm smile, and Manager Harlan presented the report. "Daniel has improved department performance by 25%, and he handled the most recent incident without major damage." My heart raced as I heard those words, not from pride, but from astonishment. Just a few months earlier, I had been an outsider among the sharply dressed suits. Now they were promoting me to a role with far greater responsibility, overseeing the entire internal maintenance system far beyond my initial position. "You deserve this position, Daniel," Mr. Charles said, shaking my hand firmly. Mrs. Helen gave me a gentle hug. "We're proud of you." I nodded politely, but inside I was filled with worry. This promotion meant the spotlight was shining on me more intensely, and it would likely anger those lurking in the shadows. The news spread quickly within the company, like a breeze whispering through the glass hallways and meeting rooms. For many, it was a well-deserved outcome. Colleagues began greeting me with genuine smiles, not the superficial ones from the beginning. Mike, the guy from the tech department, patted my shoulder at the water cooler. "Congratulations, Daniel. You've saved us so many times." Those words warmed my heart, but I couldn't shake the anticipation. This attention could turn me into a target. For Landon, the news was a direct blow to his fragile ego and status. I sensed it immediately that afternoon when we crossed paths in the elevator. His eyes darkened, his lips pressed tightly together, and he brushed past without a word. Just a cold nod. My heart raced with unease. What was he thinking? Would he accept it or react violently? I tried to push it aside by focusing on my new role, but the feeling clung to me like a shadow trailing behind. That evening, Mr. and Mrs. Charles and Helen invited me to their mansion for dinner. The invitation came via an email from Mrs. Helen. "Dear Daniel, please come to our home tonight. Not for business, just a family dinner to celebrate you." The tone was more affectionate than formal, showing that their trust and fondness had gone beyond a simple boss-employee relationship. My heart raced as I read it. This wasn't my first time at the villa, but this felt different, as if I were being drawn deeper into their world. I drove home to change, choosing my cleanest shirt and simple trousers, yet still feeling out of place. On the way, wind howled through the cracked window, carrying the scent of damp earth, and I couldn't help pondering, would Landon be there? How would he react seeing me at the family dinner table? Before dinner, I stopped by my parents' house for advice. The familiar road now carried the weight of these changes. The home was still cozy with yellow lights and the smell of soup simmering on the stove. My father, Gale, sat in his armchair with a book in hand. His health improved, but still tired from the surgery. My mother, Genesis, hugged me tightly as I entered. "It's been a while. How have you been?" I told them everything. The leadership's recognition, the dinner invitation, and my vague concerns about Landon. My father listened intently, then reminded me in his stern yet loving voice. "Daniel, success is good, but stay grounded. Don't let it cloud who you are, discipline and self-respect. In that world, temptations are plentiful." My mother, both proud and worried, squeezed my hand. "I'm happy for you, but I have a feeling something unsettling is approaching. Be careful with their son." Her words made my heart race faster. My mother always had a sixth sense for trouble. I hugged them goodbye and drove to the villa with a creeping unease, as if a dark cloud was gathering on the horizon. The Montgomery mansion was meticulously prepared for dinner, perfect to the point of looking like a scene from a magazine. The iron gate opened slowly, leading me into the vast grounds with lush green lawns stretching under soft yellow lights. From inside, the warm aroma of food wafted out, blending with the quiet evening air, making everything feel both luxurious and strangely welcoming. Mr. Charles and Mrs. Helen were waiting at the door. He grasped my hand in a firm, warm shake while she stepped forward for a gentle hug, smiling kindly. "Come in, dear. Make yourself at home. Don't be shy." In that moment, I suddenly realized I was being welcomed not just as a guest, but as someone who had earned a place in this home. The initial atmosphere was warm and formal yet relaxed. The table set with flickering candles, red wine, and elegant appetizers. I took my seat, maintaining a humble demeanor, fully aware of my position in this family. Not a biological son, just someone trusted. We chatted lightly about the weather and daily work, and Mr. Charles asked about my parents. "How are they? We still remember what you did for us on that trail." My heart raced with gratitude, but I replied simply, "They're well, sir." And it was just what anyone should have done. Landon arrived late, bringing with him an air of recklessness and undisguised irritation. The door opened with a loud bang. He entered with disheveled hair, a slightly wrinkled suit, and a faint smell of alcohol, clearly from some party. He apologized casually, blaming traffic, but his eyes swept over me with hostility. My presence at the dinner made him feel invaded in his own family territory. He sat across from me, gripping his knife and fork tightly, and the atmosphere suddenly shifted from warm to heavy. My heart raced faster, a chill running down my spine. He was suppressing rage, and I was the target. During the meal, conversations about work and the company's future gradually revealed the stark contrast between Landon and me. Mr. Charles looked at me, his voice deep and clear. Daniel handled the incident very well. Without him, the company's losses would have been much greater. I shook my head slightly, smiling modestly. I only played a small part, sir. It was the team's effort. I just did my job. But Landon responded with sarcasm and frustration. Oh yes, our hero. But who approved the initial change? Why doesn't anyone mention that? His voice was venomous and the table fell silent for a second. Mrs. Helen tried to change the subject. Eat up, dear. The roast is delicious. But the mood grew heavier. She attempted to keep things calm by asking about my interests, while Charles grew sterner as he noticed his son crossing boundaries. Landon, that's enough. This is a family dinner. As the conversation shifted to succession and the family's future, the atmosphere at the table changed dramatically, as if someone had inadvertently touched a tightly strung wire. Mr. Charles set down his wine glass, his voice lowering and becoming direct. This company isn't just an asset. It's a responsibility. It needs a leader with the strength to carry it. Landon, you need to change your lifestyle. He paused, his gaze more severe. If you continue living so recklessly, we'll have no choice but to reconsider everything, including the will. Mrs. Helen gently placed her hand on her husband's, then looked at Landon, her voice still soft but unflinching. We worry about you more than you realize. But love can't be an excuse to hand the company's future to someone who isn't ready. Landon let out a bitter laugh. His smile twisted. He swirled his wine glass, his tone mocking. Reconsider everything? What do you mean? That I'm not capable, but someone else is? Mrs. Helen quickly interjected, her voice softer but direct. That's not it, Landon. We just want you to take life more seriously. The company needs someone willing to sacrifice, not just show up when it's convenient. Landon looked up, his eyes darkening. What about him? He said, his gaze shifting straight to me. What has he sacrificed? Just because he fixed a few incidents, you think you found your successor? I shifted slightly in my chair, trying to keep my voice calm. Landon, I've never... He cut me off, his voice rising. Shut up. Who do you think you are sitting here? A tire fixer, an outsider, suddenly walking into our home and being hailed as a hero. My heart pounded. I turned to Mr. Charles and Mrs. Helen, but they remained silent, their expressions heavy. Mr. Charles finally spoke, his voice harder than ever. That's enough, Landon. You've gone too far. Landon stood abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. You say I've gone too far? I'm just telling the truth. You'd rather trust an outsider than your own son. Mrs. Helen stood as well, her voice trembling but resolute. No one is replacing you, but you have to prove you're worthy. We can't hand the company's future to someone who isn't ready to take responsibility. Landon gripped his wine glass so tightly his knuckles turned white. So that's it, right? He said, his voice low and venomous. As long as there's the obedient Daniel who knows how to bow, you're ready to push me aside. Mr. Charles slammed his hand on the table, ordering Landon to be silent. But everything had spiraled out of control. Landon shoved his chair back with a loud crash. He spoke, his cold gaze sweeping over everyone. You'll regret this, I promise you that. He turned and strode out of the room. The door slammed shut, the echo reverberating throughout the mansion like a final bolt. The room fell into silence. Mrs. Helen covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Charles slumped in his chair, his face flushed with anger and helplessness. After a long moment, he turned to me, his voice hoarse. I'm sorry, Daniel. We let things go too far. I shook my head gently. I'm fine, sir. I just didn't expect it to turn out like this. But inside, I was far from calm. Landon wasn't just angry, he was hurt, cornered, and out of control. A cold premonition ran down my spine. This wasn't over. Perhaps it was only beginning. I asked to leave early, even though dinner wasn't finished. Thank you both, but I should head home, I said, my voice steady but my heart full of unease. They walked me to the door. Mrs. Helen hugged me tightly. You're a bright part of our lives, Daniel. But as I stepped outside, the cold wind whipping my face, I clearly sensed the instability in Landon's eyes and actions, though I couldn't yet name the rising fear inside me. He had vanished into the darkness of the grounds, and that thought made me shudder. On the drive away from the mansion through dimly lit streets with sparse streetlights, I didn't feel the relief one might expect after a career milestone. Instead, there was a vague unease, as if a string had been pulled too tight and was about to snap. My heart raced the entire way, images of Landon slamming the door replaying endlessly. Would he stop at words? Or take action? I pulled over for a moment, breathing deeply, trying to shake it off. But the bad feeling lingered, as my mother had said something unsettling was approaching. I left the Montgomery grounds carrying the sense that tonight would not end peacefully. I got home, collapsed onto the bed, but sleep wouldn't come. The wind howled outside the window like a warning, and I knew that from this moment everything had changed irreparably. Landon, he was like a bomb, and I had unwittingly become the fuse. Would the storm hit? Or could I avoid it? That anticipation kept me awake until dawn, and I knew the coming days would be full of drama. After that chaotic dinner, as I drove away from the Montgomery mansion, my mood was heavier than ever before. The road was pitch black. The headlights of my old pickup truck illuminated the swaying trees along the shoulder, casting eerie shadows that seemed to follow me. Wind howled through the cracked window, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. But it couldn't dispel the unease tightening in my chest. My heart pounded, not from exhaustion after a long day, but because Landon's shouted words still echoed in my head. "You like this kid more than your own son, don't you?" The look in his eyes at that moment, full of hatred and desperation, made me shudder. Would he stop at words? Or would that rage explode into something worse? I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to focus on the road, but my intuition whispered, "Don't go too far." Throughout the drive, the unease persisted, urging me to slow down and then decide to turn back. I veered onto a side road, parked in a hidden spot near the mansion gate, turned off the headlights, and sat motionless in the darkness. It was as if my gut was warning me something was about to happen. A vague but powerful premonition that made my hands tremble slightly as I held my phone, hesitating whether to call Mr. Charles. Time dragged slowly in that silent night, like a film building gradually to its climax. The mansion stood quiet under the waning moon, faint lights spilling from a few windows, casting weak glows across the lawn. I sat in the truck, scolding myself for overthinking. "You're crazy, Daniel. Landon's just angry. He'll calm down." I checked the clock, it was nearly midnight, and prepared to start the engine and leave, convinced I was being paranoid. But then from afar came the growl of an engine, shattering the silence. My heart raced faster, blood rushing to my ears. A vehicle sped toward the gate at an abnormal speed, tires screeching on the gravel. I squinted through the windshield. It was Landon's car, the sleek black SUV I'd seen him drive to the office. The vehicle screeched to a halt at the gate. The door flew open and Landon stumbled out, clearly out of control. He swayed, leaning on the car door for support, and the strong smell of alcohol wafted on the wind toward me. His face was flushed red under the streetlight, eyes bloodshot, hair disheveled. No longer the arrogant vice president, but a drunken man consumed by rage. My heart pounded like a war drum. Had he gone drinking after dinner? And now returned for what? I sat frozen, holding my breath, watching from afar. I watched from a distance, torn between leaving and intervening. Landon staggered toward the gate, punching in the code with trembling hands, and entered the grounds. The gate closed behind him, and he charged straight into the house, shoving the front door open without knocking. The unease inside me turned into clear fear, a jolt running down my spine. Would he harm Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery? Or was it just more arguing? I clenched the steering wheel, wrestling internally. "This isn't your business, Daniel. Go home." But memories of my father flooded back. When you see someone in trouble, you don't turn your back. I turned off the engine, sat watching, my heart racing so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The night air was freezing, the wind howling stronger, and I prayed it was all just imagination. Soon after, chaotic sounds erupted from inside the mansion, crashing furniture, as if chairs toppled or vases shattered. Mrs. Helen's screams in a cacophony that shattered the night's quiet. My heart seemed to stop for a second, then pounded wildly in horror. "Something's wrong," I muttered, my blood turning to ice. This wasn't a normal argument, it was violence. I no longer hesitated. I jumped out of the truck and ran toward the house, fully aware I was stepping into danger but unable to turn away. My feet pounded on the wet grass, wind whipping my face, heart racing as if it might burst. Would I get there in time? Or was it already too late? I pushed through the side gate, luckily unlocked, and rushed into the house through the back door I'd used before. Inside, the scene froze me in place. The living room was in chaos, furniture overturned, vases shattered on the floor, and blood splattered in places. The butler, an older man I'd met before, lay collapsed near the door, unconscious with a head wound, blood streaming down. Another security guard was sprawled nearby, breathing weakly, clearly caught off guard. The space was wrecked, devastated as if by a tornado. From the inner room came intermittent shouts, Landon's voice distorted and frenzied. I didn't think twice. I charged in on instinct. In the grand living room, the sight before me left me stunned. Landon had completely lost control. In his hand was a kitchen knife, its blade glinting under the chandelier. Mr. Charles stood shielding Mrs. Helen, his back slightly hunched as if to protect her, his face pale but trying to stay calm. "Calm down, son. Listen to me. Put the knife down." Mrs. Helen stood behind him, trembling hands clutching his arm, tears streaming endlessly. "Please stop, I beg you. Don't do something foolish." Landon panted heavily, eyes bloodshot and vacant. He shook his head repeatedly, muttering as if to himself, "It's all because of you. All because of you both. And that bastard too, for turning me into what I am today." I took another step, trying to keep my voice steady despite my heart pounding as if it would shatter my chest. "Landon, look at me. Stop this. No one wants this to happen." I moved slowly into the room, deliberately positioning myself to one side to draw his attention away from the couple. Landon's eyes immediately locked onto me. His rage seemed to find a new target. He roared, "You're the cause of it all. If it weren't for you..." He lunged forward, the knife swinging wildly. Time seemed to slow. My body tensed, adrenaline surging with every beat. I heard my father's voice in my head, calm and firm. "Don't confront needlessly. Keep distance. Control the situation." I sidestepped, dodging the first thrust, maintaining just enough space. "Landon, listen to me," I shouted. "Don't destroy everything." He lunged again, but the alcohol made his movements sluggish and uncoordinated. I seized the moment, grabbing his knife-wielding wrist and twisting it back. Landon howled, struggling wildly. His strength surprised me. He cursed. "Let go. You'll pay for messing with my life." We grappled for tense seconds. I gritted my teeth, staying calm, channeling force into the hold I'd practiced since childhood. The knife clattered to the floor with a sharp metallic ring. Before he could react, I spun and shoved him down, pinning his arms and legs to restrain him. Landon thrashed furiously beneath me, gasping, his voice hoarse. "You'll regret this, Daniel. I swear it." I didn't respond, just held tighter, my body drenched in sweat, heart racing from fear and determination. After a few dazed seconds, Charles and Helen snapped out of it. Mr. Charles shakily rushed to the security panel, slamming the alarm button. "Police. We need the police now." Mrs. Helen knelt beside the unconscious butler, her voice breaking in tears. "Please, wake up. Please." The room gradually sank into heavy silence, broken only by ragged breathing and the lingering shock of the horror that had swept through. I still pinned Landon down, my mind reeling as if trapped in a nightmare with no escape. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Blue and red lights flashed through the windows. Police swarmed the grounds, taking control. They pulled Landon from my grasp and cuffed him. He continued screaming, eyes wild with hatred as he was led away. Medics followed, quickly providing first aid and loading the butler and guard onto stretchers. Charles turned back, embracing the trembling Helen. He looked at me, eyes red, voice choked. "Thank you, Daniel. If you hadn't been here, I don't dare think what would have happened." I stood there, hands still shaking slightly, throat dry. That night I realized I had crossed a boundary, from which nothing could return to how it was before. I sat alone in the living room afterward, hands still trembling faintly, blood from the butler's wound staining my shirt. I realized that if I hadn't turned back, if I'd chosen to leave earlier, everything might have ended in an irreparable tragedy. My heart raced at the near-miss consequences. The Montgomerys could have died, Landon a murderer, and I would have lived with regret forever. That night ended not just with the collapse of a family, Landon taken away, the Montgomerys devastated, but also the moment I unwittingly became the one standing between life and death for everyone involved. The wind still howled outside the window, but now it carried the echoes of chaos. I drove home at dawn, utterly exhausted, knowing the storm had arrived, and I was at its center. After that chaotic night at the mansion, the Montgomery estate was sealed off for the investigation. I learned this from an early morning call from Mr. Charles. "Daniel, the police are here. They need your statement again." The luxurious atmosphere that once defined the place, the lush green lawns, sparkling pool, and magnificent villa, had vanished entirely, replaced by a cold and oppressive heaviness. Police barricades surrounded the property, patrol cars crowded the gate, and plainclothes investigators moved in and out with stern faces. I drove back that afternoon, my heart racing at the sight. The villa now resembled a crime scene, with yellow tape cordoning off the living room and overturned furniture left in place for photographs. Mr. Charles and Mrs. Helen looked as if they had aged a decade overnight. Him sitting on the sofa, face ashen, her clutching a handkerchief to wipe away tears. "Thank you for coming back," he whispered as I entered. I nodded, but inside I was filled with worry. Would this drag on or affect the company and me? The police took my statement again soon after, returning to confirm details. In a temporary interview room, a corner of the study with a wooden desk and dim yellow lamp, 2 officers sat across from me, taking careful notes. I recounted the entire incident truthfully, without embellishment or blame, focusing only on what I witnessed and my actions to prevent tragedy. "I turned back because of a bad feeling," I said, my voice steady even though my hands trembled under the table. "Then I heard noises, rushed in, and saw Landon holding a knife." They asked for specifics, timelines, positions, and how I subdued him. My heart raced each time I recalled it. The overpowering smell of alcohol, the crashing sounds, the real fear as the knife swung. I didn't portray Landon as a villain, I just stated the facts. He was drunk and out of control. I didn't want anyone hurt, I concluded. The officer nodded. "You saved their lives. Your statement matches the cameras." I left the room with some relief, but the unease lingered. My testimony could determine Landon's fate, and I was the key witness. Evidence was gathered quickly, and things moved faster than I expected. Security cameras inside and outside the mansion captured everything. Landon speeding through the gate, staggering into the house, attacking the butler and guard, then cornering his parents with a knife. The staff's statements, given after they fortunately regained consciousness in the hospital, aligned perfectly. Landon shouting and assaulting them when they tried to intervene. The injuries to the butler and security guard were clear: cuts, bruises, and head trauma. All evidence pointed to Landon completely losing control while heavily intoxicated. His blood alcohol level was extremely high upon testing. I heard from Mr. Charles a few days later. "The evidence is overwhelming, Daniel. We can't cover it up." My heart raced with sympathy. Landon was once their son. Now he was a criminal. But also with anticipation. Where would this lead? Would it drag me into legal turmoil? The butler and security guard luckily pulled through after a few days in the hospital. I visited them once, bringing flowers and fruit, my heart racing with guilt. Even though it wasn't my fault, I was part of that night. The butler, head bandaged, gave a weak smile. "Thank you. If not for you, I wouldn't be here to say it." The guard grasped my hand. "You're a hero to us." But the physical and emotional wounds left heavy consequences. The butler suffered mild brain trauma and needed long-term rest. The guard had a broken arm and psychological trauma. The incident couldn't be hushed up. Media began reporting despite the Montgomery's efforts to keep it private. My heart raced whenever I read the news. Billionaire's son attacks family in drunken rage. Would they blame me? Or would this impact the company? Landon was held in custody for the investigation, and the arrogance and recklessness that once shielded him crumbled before the reality of the law. I imagined him in jail. No expensive suits, no luxury cars, just a prisoner awaiting trial. Mr. Charles said over the phone, "He's coming to his senses, but it's too late." My heart raced with mixed feelings, pity for Landon, but anger that he nearly killed people. Charles and Helen faced the painful truth. Their son's actions weren't a one-night outburst, but the result of years of indulgence, cover-ups, and avoiding parental responsibility. They admitted it to me in a brief meeting. "We spoiled him too much, Daniel. We didn't teach him accountability." Mrs. Helen cried, "If we'd been stricter, this wouldn't have happened." I comforted them, but inside I felt uneasy. They were breaking, and I was a witness. In the following days, they visited the hospital to apologize to the butler and guard, covering all medical costs and compensation. Not to evade the law, but to show moral responsibility. I accompanied them once, my heart racing in the heavy atmosphere. Mr. Charles bowed to the butler. "I'm sorry we failed as parents." Mrs. Helen wept. "We'll take care of everything, just rest." The victims forgave them, but the scars remained. The case spread, and the couple faced public scrutiny, reporters swarming, questioning child rearing in elite circles. My heart raced whenever I saw the news. Would they overcome this? Or would the family shatter? The trial took place in a somber atmosphere a few months after that night. The case drew massive attention due to the Montgomery name. Reporters packed outside the courthouse, camera flashes constant. But Charles and Helen made no attempt to interfere or use influence to lessen their son's responsibility. They sat in the front row, faces pale, holding hands. I was summoned as a witness. Standing before the judge and jury with all eyes on me, my heart pounded as if it might burst. I recounted the events as a civic duty, voice calm despite trembling hands on the stand. I turned back on a hunch, saw Landon with the knife, and subdued him to protect them. No resentment or desire for revenge, just the truth. Landon sat in the defendant's chair, gaunt, avoiding my gaze. In the end, the court sentenced Landon to 6 years in prison for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and related violent acts. No exceptions, no interference. The Montgomery family's wealth and status couldn't change the outcome. After the trial, Charles and Helen fell into a prolonged silence. They barely appeared at the company, choosing to stay at the villa to reflect on what had happened. Their greatest loss wasn't just a son behind bars, but the belated realization of their mistakes in raising him. In one private meeting, Mrs. Helen said to me, her voice slow and weary, "We gave him everything, except discipline." Hearing that, my heart suddenly tightened. I understood. The price of indulgence doesn't always show immediately, but when it does, nothing can compensate for it. I continued my work at the company, maintaining clear distance from the Montgomery family affairs. I didn't exploit the tragedy for advancement or sympathy, just focused on operations, helping the department stabilize after the scandal. In the quiet aftermath, I noticed Charles and Helen observing me more closely. Not with suspicion or caution, but through calls to the private office, seemingly casual questions about work, how I handled a situation or made a decision. They didn't praise much, but through their eyes and listening, I sensed a different kind of respect. I realized they weren't seeing me just for that night, but for what followed. I didn't claim credit, shirk responsibility, or overstep my bounds. Once, after a conversation ended, Mr. Charles looked at me for a long moment and said slowly, "You work the way someone in a family should, Daniel." Those words made my heart race more than I expected. I didn't know if it was gratitude or an unintentional comparison. I didn't dare ask. In my mind flashed a thought that made me wary. They were seeing me as someone reliable, and that trust, if not kept in proper measure, could become a burden rather than an honor. In the days that followed, the Montgomery family's life entered an entirely different phase. The mansion was no longer a place of power and pride, with lavish parties or important meetings held in the grand living room. Instead, it became quiet, bearing the marks of irreversible losses, the scratches on the wooden floor from that chaotic night. Family photos turned face down to avoid painful reminders, and a heavy atmosphere that enveloped everything like a fog. I learned this through brief calls from Mr. Charles. "We're trying to adjust, Daniel, but everything will be different." My heart raced every time I heard his voice, tired, full of pain. They spent much of their time at home, rarely appearing at the company, and I could imagine them sitting in the dimly lit study, gazing out at the lush garden but feeling empty inside. I continued working as usual at Montgomery Enterprises, waking early, driving to the office with a cup of bitter black coffee, and diving into the operations systems without prying or speculating about their family matters. For me, saving lives and fulfilling my responsibilities had been enough. I didn't want to intrude on wounds that were still bleeding. Colleagues still whispered about the incident, their eyes on me filled with curiosity mixed with admiration. "You saved the owners." But I kept my distance, focusing on work, overseeing system restructuring projects, attending meetings with managers, and fixing minor issues before they became major problems. My heart raced every time I stepped into the office. The atmosphere remained tense after the scandal, and I sensed the change. People trusted me more, but expected more as well. Could I handle it? Or would I crumble under the pressure? I called my parents weekly, telling them about work, and they reminded me, "Just do things honestly and stay grounded. Don't let anyone's pressure or expectations sway you." Their words calmed me, but deep down I knew my relationship with Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery was growing closer. Through check-in calls, brief coffee invitations, and that made me anxious. What did they expect from me? Or was it simply gratitude? One quiet evening, as the sun set behind the city's high-rises, Mr. Charles called, "Daniel, come to our home tonight. Just a light meal and some talk." My heart raced. The invitation was informal, without ceremony, but I knew this wasn't an ordinary meeting. I drove to the villa. The familiar road now carried a sense of heaviness. The iron gate still imposing, but the grounds seemed darker, with fewer lights on. Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery greeted me at the door. He shook my hand firmly. She gave a gentle hug. "Come in, Daniel. Tonight it's just a home-cooked meal, no need to overthink it." There was no formal or legal heaviness, just a private, sincere gathering in the small dining room with flickering candles and simple salad. We sat around the table chatting about work, the weather, and gradually they expressed profound gratitude, not only for saving their lives that night, but for showing them the image of the son they had hoped for but failed to raise. Mr. Charles looked at me for a long moment before speaking, his voice deep and slow. "Daniel, you have discipline. You take responsibility, and you know how to keep kindness in the right place. Those things we should have taught Landon early on." Mrs. Helen turned away briefly, her eyes already reddening, then looked back at me. "You didn't just save us once on that trail. You've saved us many times since, through the way you live and the choices you make every day." Those words made my heart race more than I wanted. I sensed the sincerity in them, but at the same time felt a quiet weight settling on my shoulders. Not an explicit expectation, but an invisible responsibility I wasn't sure I was ready to bear. After a short silence, Mr. Charles took a deep breath and addressed what I had sensed from the start of the evening. He looked at me, his gaze so serious it couldn't be misunderstood. "Daniel, we want to legally adopt you." The words fell lightly on the table, but to me they were heavy as stone. He continued, voice still calm. Not to replace anyone. We just want you to truly be part of this family, to walk the road ahead with us. Mrs. Helen nodded, quickly wiping the corner of her eye. We're not looking for an heir to the assets, she said slowly. We need someone we can trust, someone who can help us fix what we got wrong. I sat motionless, my mind blank. My mouth opened, but no words came. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat so clear I thought they could hear it. Blood rushed to my face, hot and cold at once. I understood this wasn't an impulsive offer nor pity, and that made it more bewildering than anything before. I didn't know whether to thank them, refuse, or ask for time. I only knew that from that moment my life had been placed at a crossroads I never imagined facing. Just an ordinary maintenance worker, now invited to join an elite family. That thought left me unable to respond immediately. I felt no elation, no sense of triumph. What rose most clearly was hesitation. For me, family had never been something adopted on paper. It was blood, memories, the lessons my birth parents had taught me all my life. I wondered, if I accepted, would I be betraying them? Or was this simply another chance to do the right thing as life was opening before me? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from shaking too much. Sir, ma'am, I need some time to think. I don't want to make a hasty decision. Charles and Helen nodded without pressure. They walked me to the door, their eyes holding quiet anticipation, full of hope, but respectful. I got in the car and drove into the silent night, the road ahead dimly lit. My heart still raced, my mind in turmoil, knowing that whatever I chose, my life from here on would no longer be the same. That very weekend, I returned to my birth parents' home, driving the familiar roads with cool wind and the scent of suburban earth. The house was unchanged, cozy with yellow lights and my mother's home-cooked dinner. I told them everything, the Montgomerys' proposal, my hesitation. My father, Gale, listened to his son with the calm of a battlefield veteran, emphasizing that titles don't erase roots if one knows where they belong. Son, paperwork is just formality, he said, voice deep and warm. But if you accept, do it for the right reasons, not money but responsibility. Never forget who we are. My mother, Genesis, teared up, both proud and worried. I just want you to live true to the values you were raised with. Honest, humble. Don't let that world change you. Their words made my heart race. Their support wasn't coercive, just sincere advice. I stayed with them late into the night, talking about childhood memories, and the anticipation gradually turned into resolve. This wasn't an easy choice, but perhaps the right one. After many days of reflection, sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, weighing every aspect, I made my decision. I agreed to become Charles and Helen's adopted son, not for wealth or status, but because I believed I could help them mend what remained unfinished, building a true legacy based on values, not money. My heart raced as I called them, voicing the decision I had pondered for many nights. I agreed to the adoption. All legal procedures were handled discreetly, just a few meetings with lawyers, signatures in a quiet private office, no media, no fanfare. For me, this wasn't a dramatic life change, but a new responsibility, heavier than anything I'd carried before. I felt its weight almost immediately through the way they looked at me, not loudly or imposingly, but filled with expectation. And in that moment, one question repeated in my mind. Would I be strong enough not to disappoint them? I carefully reorganized my life, avoiding sudden changes. I continued caring for my birth parents diligently, driving to visit weekly, bringing groceries, sending extra money, talking late into the night, maintaining closeness, ensuring no distance formed. At work, I didn't alter my leadership style. I emphasized discipline, responsibility, and fairness, holding weekly meetings to listen to employees, improving processes without layoffs, gradually building the culture Charles and Helen had always wanted but never fully achieved due to indulging Landon. Charles and Helen found peace through these changes. They spent time together reflecting on the past, and gradually smiles returned to their faces. You've brought hope back to us, Mrs. Helen said once. They understood that assets can be passed down, but a true legacy is a person strong enough not to repeat the mistakes of the previous generation. And in me, they saw that. My heart raced with the responsibility. I wasn't replacing Landon, just continuing in the right way. One afternoon, as the sun set behind the suburban hills, I stood alone reflecting on the journey. From the deserted trail where I stopped out of kindness, through the chaotic nights, the trial, to this present position, not chosen through ambition but through responsibility and moral choices. A breeze passed, carrying the familiar scent of earth, and my heart raced with emotion. Life is truly strange, full of surprises and challenges. Looking back on everything, I understood that family isn't defined only by blood or wealth. Family is formed by the choices people make when facing power, money, and irreparable mistakes. I had seen one family collapse from indulgence and witnessed another trying to heal through honesty and responsibility. For me, being called a son or not matters less than living worthy of the trust given. And if this story leaves anything, it's a reminder that a family's value lies in how we treat each other, especially in life's most difficult moments.